In the 1950s, 90% of Australian male infants were circumcised. Today, the figure is somewhere between 10 and 20%. What would your decision be when it comes to subjecting your baby boy to the snip, particularly since current belief is that there is no medical reason for routine circumcision?
Dr. Alex Wodak, an AIDS specialist from Sydney, joins us to discuss recent research showing an increased incidence of HIV and AIDS and sometimes other STDs in uncircumcised men. Good morning, Alex.
Morning,
Thanks
Alex.
for your time this morning.
Good morning.
Why historically, initially, was circumcision deemed necessary?
Well, in centuries ago, hygiene wasn't what it is today. As hygiene has improved, I suppose the pressure for high rates of infant male circumcision dropped a little bit, and so adult males in Australia in their 50s and 60s and 70s have rates of 70%. In children today it's as low as 10 to 20%.
That interests me, considering the World Health Organization has recommended circumcision, particularly in African countries, as a way to prevent AIDS.
Yes, I don't think the world has really woken up to quite what a serious long-term threat AIDS is. We think we've done pretty well in Australia, and we have, but there are still ever-increasing numbers of HIV infections in Australia, and the proportion of those that are accounted for by heterosexual men and women is steadily increasing and is now over 20%. In the US and UK, it's over 40%.
So to what extent does circumcision help the prevention of sexually transmitted diseases and HIV/AIDS?
Well, looking at HIV, we've got almost 40 studies now that show a very substantial reduction in the risk of men acquiring HIV from women. Somewhere between 60%, could be as high as 75%. This is heterosexual men with women. And most of these studies, but not all, are from Africa, and they include what are called randomised control trials, 3 of those, involving over 11,000 men in 3 African countries with very substantial reduction in HIV. So I think the evidence is overwhelming on that. In terms of the other sexually transmitted infections, some are and some aren't reduced because of male circumcision, but genital herpes and chlamydia are amongst those that are reduced.
Well, Alex, what do you say to parents, though, particularly mums, I think, are really very sensitive about it. What do you say to mums who say, well, I don't want to do that to my baby, it's too young, it's painful, it's stressful on the child?
Look, all of that's understandable, but the benefit outweighs the risk by something like 100 to 1. Yes, there's pain involved, but these days we've got modern anaesthetics, so that pain is minimal, and in any case, in an infant, it's over fairly quickly. But against that, you have to think of real harms to the uncircumcised boy and later man of something like a 1 in 10 risk of a urinary tract infection in the uncircumcised, whereas the risk of an urinary tract infection in the circumcised is very much lower. Cancer of the penis, for example, occurs in 1 in 600 uncircumcised men and is virtually unheard of in circumcised men.
Why? Why is that? Is it a simple matter of hygiene?
It's to do with the anatomy of the foreskin, which traps material underneath it, including presumably cancer-causing excretions from the skin, and also because of the risk of the greater risk of acquiring an infection with a particular kind of virus, the papillomavirus, which can cause cancer, and which in fact also causes a greater risk of cancer of the cervix in the female sex partners of uncircumcised males. So there are benefits to women, direct benefits to women, apart from the direct benefits to the male.
As I understand it, you would like to see the rates of circumcision increase dramatically. How do you then go about getting that back on the agenda when we know that now that it's difficult to find doctors who will actually perform the surgery?
If demand starts increasing, doctors will soon adapt their practices and will start providing the service. we've got barriers in the form of very low Medicare rates, which need to be looked at again, and we've also got barriers in that the public hospital system is not open to this kind of surgery in many parts of the country, and so we've got to get the state and territory departments of health to have another look at that and think about being more encouraging about this operation. It's a small operation.
Is it
it's a
safe?
routine operation. Yes, it is safe. There's a risk of about 1 in 200, 1 in 500 of minor side effects, things like infection or bleeding. They're small problems that are easily dealt with. But as I mentioned before, the benefits outweigh the risks by something like 100 to 1.
And there are other medical reasons why circumcision does take place, aren't there?
Oh, certainly. Well, there are reasons why that occurs in infancy and also in adulthood, and one of the common medical reasons for doing this operation is complications with the foreskin, where it becomes too tight and scarred and doesn't retract properly, or it's retracted and gets trapped, trapping part of the penis where there's no alternative but to perform a circumcision. Look, I think we have to look at this issue again with objective eyes, with open eyes.
Alex, what is the current trend? Is the trend toward circumcision, or is it still against circumcision?
Demand seems to be picking up in Australia, and around the world we're seeing big changes, particularly in Africa, where demand for this operation far outstrips supply, and the World Health Organization, UNAIDS, Global Fund and other organizations are really putting money into making sure this operation is more readily available in Africa. 70% of the world's HIV infections occur in sub-Saharan Africa, but in the rest of the world, demand is starting to pick up.
Would you go as far, Alex, as saying that you would like to see young boys and young men actually go through a circumcision at this point for their long-term health?
Yes, I would. I think the evidence is overwhelming, but let me hasten to add very quickly that this should always be voluntary, and I would strenuously object to any form of compulsion. I think we should be encouraging people, particularly with education, laying out the arguments for and the arguments against as fairly as possible, and I don't think that's happened up until now.
Do the dangers increase as a person ages? I mean, is it more dangerous for a young man than a baby, for instance?
The operation's infinitely easier in the newborn, and it can be done in adults. I've seen it done in adults, and it's certainly possible, but it's more uncomfortable, it's more problematic. So if we can get this done in young people, all the better. I think there's also, it's worth saying that there's some evidence, not very much so far, but there's some evidence of quite a striking reduction in the risk of HIV infection for circumcised gay men. There's only one study that I'm aware of so far, but the risk for a group of gay men, not all gay men, but a subgroup of gay men, was a reduction of 85%. That's a pretty significant reduction.
Wow, and it's
so
quite a topical conversation given the fact that Mardi Gras is on this weekend too.
Yes, yes indeed.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex. Really good to chat to you. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex.